Disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction set in a dystopian world and contains strong themes including authoritarianism, systemic transphobia, domestic abuse, and sexual language. These elements are portrayed to explore and critique harmful ideologies, not to promote them. The views and actions of the characters do not reflect those of the author. Some scenes may be disturbing or triggering for some viewers. Viewer discretion is strongly advised.
"10 a.m., 34 hours until the unleashing." Alex stood in front of the bathroom mirror, carefully dabbing aftershave along his jawline. The sharp sting he'd heard about, the one that followed a proper wet shave, was still unfamiliar to him. But he had heard that girls liked the baby-faced look. Regardless of the need to shave, he liked that it made him feel a little more grown up. He inhaled the crisp, sharp scent and smiled faintly at his reflection in the mirror. The peaceful silence of the morning was interrupted by the creak of the bathroom door. His father stepped in, his expression settling into a faint sneer as his eyes swept over Alex. "Who's the girl, eh?" his dad asked, leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed. "No one," Alex replied quickly, straightening up. He tried to sound casual, but his father's gaze had a way of making him feel like a kid caught doing something wrong. His dad chuckled, although there was no humour there. "Well, it better not be a special boy you're poofing yourself up for, or there'll be trouble." The words were light, but the undercurrent of threat made Alex's stomach churn. He knew his father. He'd grown up hearing all about his and his drunken friends' views. And even though Alex knew he wasn't gay, the thought of his dad even suspecting such a thing made his blood run cold. "No, it's not," Alex said quickly, avoiding his father's eyes. His dad smirked, shaking his head. "No? Good. When I was your age, I'd already done more girls than I could count. You're making me look bad, boy. No son of mine is going to end up a 40-year-old virgin." He paused, his smirk deepening, relishing Alex's discomfort. Alex's grip tightened on the aftershave lid, his mouth a thin line as he forced himself to keep quiet. The retort hovered in his mind. "I didn't know you could count," but he swallowed it down, not daring to let it escape. "I've seen the state of your socks. You've clearly practiced enough, eh?" his dad added, his voice laced with mockery. Alex felt the heat rise to his face, embarrassment creeping into every corner of his body. "I've got to get to work," he mumbled, brushing past his father and out of the bathroom. "Attaboy!" his dad called after him, laughter trailing behind as Alex charged down the stairs, trying to outrun his humiliation. He rushed past the kitchen as his mum turned from the counter, holding out a bacon sandwich wrapped in a napkin. "You should eat before you leave." Alex shook his head, barely able to meet her eyes. "I'm running late," he muttered, sliding his feet into his already laced-up trainers by the door. "You'll be starving later," she scolded, but Alex was already pulling the door open. "Bye, Mum," he said hurriedly, stepping out into the crisp air. Behind him, he heard his dad's laughter faintly echoing from upstairs, and he shut the door with a sharp click, sealing it out. "Bastard," he mumbled to himself as he pulled the hood of his favourite hoodie up over his head. He wished he had never put the bloody aftershave on in the first place. His dad always had something to say, he thought. He didn't know why he'd used it today, he just wanted to. As Alex turned onto the main street, the thought struck him like an unexpected gust of wind. Sarah. She had played on his mind a lot recently. She was like a decade older than him, he teased himself, but the idea wasn't entirely unwelcome. Was that the real reason he'd put on the aftershave this morning, subconsciously hoping she might notice? She had been the reason for some of the sticky socks, at least. He snorted quietly, shaking his head. It didn't matter anyway. Sarah didn't like him like that. She thought he was a bit of a child. She'd as much as said so once, with a half smile that made him feel both embarrassed and strangely determined to prove her wrong. Alex's trainers echoed against the cracked pavement as he walked slowly to work. The cold morning air stung his face and the hair on his arms prickled with the chill. He'd left in such a hurry he had forgotten his coat, and his snood, it made him look gangster. He passed a tall, oppressive building that seemed to loom over the street, its grim exterior reflecting the dreary day. The sign read, Butterfly Ward. He recognized it immediately as one of the tranny prisons his father had talked about. They were places where people like them were locked away, out of sight, out of mind. The father's council didn't impose its policies on transgenderism overnight. They were too clever for that. They understood that fear, more than logic, was the ultimate weapon. They began with subtle whispers, barely noticeable at first. Stories circulated about supposed predators in women's spaces, men posing as transgender women to infiltrate bathrooms or locker rooms. These stories were unverified and sensationalized, but that didn't matter. What mattered was planting the seed of doubt. His mind drifted to a memory that had stayed with him for months. He'd been watching a YouTube video, something about Fortnite hacks, when the video was interrupted by an unskippable ad. The bright, almost cheerful music had clashed violently with the cold, clinical message that followed. A narrator with a soothing, authoritative voice explained how self-identifiers and trans deviants were now should be classified as mentally ill. They pose a proven threat to women, the narrator had claimed, over footage of a dimly lit women's bathroom door, followed by blurred clips of supposed predators caught in the act. The ad had been careful to emphasize science, statistics, and fabricated testimonies, reinforcing the council's narrative that transgender individuals were dangerous. Alex had rolled his eyes at the clear propaganda but found himself oddly transfixed. It wasn't like he totally doubted the message. His dad had always said the same things. Still, something about the ad had felt off, like it was trying too hard to convince people of something that should have already been obvious. He hadn't dwelled on it long, though. The next video had started, and he'd quickly forgotten about it. But soon, his video interruptions screamed about bathroom dangers and women at risk. Mainstream media ran segments featuring mothers clutching their daughters, their voices trembling as they recounted fabricated tales of narrowly avoided assaults. Churches preached about the sin of defying God's design, tying gender nonconformity to moral decay. Schools were accused of indoctrinating children with harmful ideas, teaching boys they could be girls, and vice versa, all under the guise of inclusivity. The council framed transgender individuals as both predators and victims of a dangerous ideology. Ads flooded every screen, showing women crying, their trust shattered, while shadowy figures lurked in the background. The message was clear. Transgender people weren't just a challenge to societal norms. They were a direct threat to women, children, and the sanctity of the family. The public, already primed by years of growing distrust in progressive policies, latched onto the narrative. They wanted someone to blame for their discomfort, their fears, and their fractured sense of stability. The Father's Council gave them an easy target. It wasn't about hatred, the council claimed. It was about protection, safety, and restoring a natural order. When the council officially reclassified gender dysphoria as a severe mental illness, the announcement was framed as a compassionate act. These individuals are suffering, they said, voices steeped in faux empathy. We can help them, but we must also protect society from harm. Psychiatric facilities, branded as butterfly wards, were introduced as places of healing, but everyone knew what they really were: prisons. The building was a cold grey with frosted glass windows starting 3 floors up, obscuring any view inside. He couldn't see in, but he was sure they couldn't see out either. Good, he thought. It was safer for everyone. There was still a concern about the ones that were missing, though. The statistics had been hammered into his head at every turn. Only 40% accounted for. So where was the rest? Dead? Hiding? Laying in wait? The thought made him shift uncomfortably. He hadn't questioned it much at the time. It wasn't his problem, and if his dad was to be believed, the world was better off this way. But still, 40% just vanished? That seemed like a lot of people to just stop existing. His dad had said they probably turned back into their proper genders and stopped fucking around. Maybe. But Alex had a harder time buying that. In his head, the missing was still out there somewhere. Hairy, muscular men in too tight dresses and smeared lipstick, skulking in the shadows of dimly lit bathrooms. Waiting for one last victim, he thought. He could picture it now, one of them leaning in close, whispering, "Trans women are women," like a mantra. A giggle slipped past Alex's chapped lips at the thought. It was ridiculous, sure, but wasn't that what the council had said? That they were dangerous predators, lurking where you'd least expect them? He wasn't too worried, though. The council had made it clear they wouldn't stop until they'd rounded up every last one. They'd started distributing those stupid leaflets everywhere, slipping them under doors, leaving them at shops, even shoving them into people's hands on the street. At least some of the predators were locked up now, though, away from normal society. His mum wouldn't have to worry about being tortured in a woman's bathroom anymore. His fists clenched slightly as he thought about the people his dad had described, those who didn't conform to what nature intended. He felt a sense of grim satisfaction that the system was keeping them in line. As he walked past, his mind wandered back to his school days. He remembered the controversy surrounding a teacher, fired for refusing to treat a student like a cat. The boy had claimed he identified as one, and the school had gone along with it, demanding the teacher follow suit. Alex couldn't fathom how anyone could let such stupidity slide. If he thought he was a cat, Alex muttered to himself, then they should have treated him like one properly. Kicked him out. The school had a strict no-pets policy after all. It made no sense to Alex why Mr. Jones had been fired, all over some stupid phase. He smirked bitterly. Should have nurtured the prick, he muttered under his breath, though a part of him vaguely wondered how much better things would have turned out for Mr. Jones if he'd played along. His jaw clenched as he recalled the aftermath. The teacher had lost his job. From what Alex had heard, the man had spiraled, ending up with depression. He had started drinking and ended up losing his wife after being caught trying to hire a prostitute. All of it, Alex was certain, because of a dick who wanted a bit of attention. He had seen the kid recently. He worked at the Starbucks 2 streets away. His hair was dark purple now, streaked messily in what Alex assumed was the latest cry for attention. Emo phase, Alex thought dismissively. The kid had moved on, living what looked like a normalish life, while the teacher, ruined. It wasn't fair. Not long ago, people like that would have been lumped in with the trans crowd. They would have been locked up alongside them too, Alex mused. But luckily, the world had stamped that shite out before it got completely out of hand. Would it have mattered if Mr. Jones had played along? Probably not. Men like him didn't last long in this world, not when they couldn't keep order. The system was broken, and Alex had been taught to believe the world was better off when everyone followed the rules. That's how it had to be. That's how things worked. As he approached the pharmacy, the weight of it all settled on his shoulders. Tomorrow would be the unleashing, and things would get worse. But at least he knew where he stood. He knew what was right, or at least his father did. And he had him to show him the way. His dad might have been a bastard, but he was a strong bastard. And strong bastards kept their families safe. Alex straightened his hoodie, letting the thought steady him. His father would keep him right. Always had. Always would. As Alex's fingers met the cold steel of the pharmacy door, he paused for a moment, taking a calming breath. He plastered on his cheeky smile, his standard mask, one that kept people from asking questions he didn't want to answer. No one needed to know what churned beneath the surface, the doubts he couldn't shake, the faint flicker of guilt that sometimes crept in when his father's words echoed too loudly in his head. Stepping inside, he adjusted his hoodie and let the door close behind him with a sharp click. The sterile scent of antiseptic mixed with Mrs. Turnbull's perfume filled his nose, and a therapeutic calm washed over him. Whatever tomorrow brought, it wasn't his problem, not yet, anyway. "Good morning, Alex," Mrs. Turnbull announced from behind the counter, her gaze lingering on the hoodie he wore, an obviously new addition to his collection, This one with the word brew in all capitals printed in the middle. The corners of her mouth twitched slightly, though she held her usual composed demeanour. Meeting her gaze, Sarah glanced up from the pile of leaflets she was folding, her brow lifting in amusement as she took in the slogan. "Nice hoodie, bruh," she said, drawing out the word with a grin that hinted at mockery. Alex hesitated for a moment, his hand brushing the edge of the counter as he took in their reactions. "Thanks," he replied with confidence, flashing a grin of his own. "Thought I'd keep it classy." Mrs. Turnbull let out a quiet sigh, her attention shifting back to the still glitching register. "Right, Alex, since you're keeping things classy, you can help Sarah with these." She nodded toward the stack of leaflets Sarah was organising. Sarah shot Alex a mischievous look, holding up one of the flyers. "Have you read these yet? Real classy stuff." Alex leaned against the counter, squinting at the bold lettering at the top of the leaflet. "Report and protect. For a safer tomorrow today." He snorted. "Catchy." "It gets better," Sarah said dryly, flipping the leaflet over to show him the instructions. "They're asking people to kindly report family and friends they suspect are, well, you know." "Let me guess, more tranny prison recruits," Alex muttered, immediately regretting his choice of words as Mrs. Turnbull's head snapped up. He braced himself as Mrs. Turnbull straightened her posture, her tone even but firm. "Alex, I don't care for anything to do with the LGBT crowd, but that doesn't mean I'll tolerate derogatory comments. We can't judge what we don't understand." "I'm sorry, that's my dad's term really, not mine," Alex said, shifting uncomfortably. "I went to a Catholic primary school, you see, and it clearly states in that novel they read all the Bible, Alex," Mrs. Turnbull interrupted, her tone a mix of offence and amusement. "Novel, for heaven's sake." She shook her head, muttering something under her breath about kids these days. Alex flushed, scratching the back of his neck. "Right, sorry. The Bible, well, it says in there, 'Thou shalt not dress like a woman,' and 'lie with other men and sheep and stuff,' doesn't it?" "I'm pretty sure they elaborate a little more, Alex, but you are essentially correct," Mrs. Turnbull replied, her voice tinged with both amusement and a hint of exasperation. Sarah, who had been silently watching the exchange, tilted her head slightly. "Not even the gays?" she asked, directing her question at Mrs. Turnbull, her voice quiet but tinged with disappointment. Mrs. Turnbull glanced at Sarah, her expression softening. "Not even them? I don't agree with it, mind you, but that doesn't give anyone the right to demean others. Everyone's got their battles, even if we don't see the sense in them." "But why?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious. "I mean, I've never really met anyone who's gay or transgender, but I wouldn't want to see anyone hurt." Mrs. Turnbull considered Sarah's question for a moment, her gaze thoughtful. "And I wouldn't either, dear," she said. "For me, it's a bit of Alex's reasoning, but one that makes more sense," shaking her head slightly. "But at the end of the day, I just don't really understand it." She looked at Sarah as if searching for some shared understanding, but it was Alex that piped up first. "Me neither," Alex said casually, struggling to fold his first leaflet. "I mean, take lesbians, for example. When they're doing sex, how do they know when to stop?" Two surprised faces met his. "What?" they both said simultaneously. Alex looked between them, his expression a mix of confusion and defensiveness. "What?" "I'm just asking. It's a fair question, isn't it?" Mrs. Turnbull shook her head, clearly not amused, but Sarah's surprise quickly gave way to disbelief. "You're really asking that, Alex?" "Well, yeah," Alex shrugged. "I mean, with straight stuff, it's over when, you know, the guy is over, but with two women, there's no, I don't know, point? Like, how do they know when it's over? Seems like there's a lot of guesswork involved, right?" Mrs. Turnbull glanced at Sarah, hoping she would handle this too. Sarah cleared her throat, clearly struggling to stifle a laugh despite herself. "Alex, you absolute child," she said, smirking and folding her arms. "That's not how it works. They don't just guess. Women orgasm too, you know." "Well, when people know what they're doing, at least," she jabbed, raising an eyebrow. Alex blinked, processing her words while Mrs. Turnbull's mouth hung open slightly. Wait, actually, Mrs. Turnbull stammered, then collected herself, trying to regain composure. No, I don't. How? Sarah bit her lip, unable to contain her laughter. Yes, Mrs. Turnbull. Women orgasm too, but like I said, you need to know what you're doing. She winked at Alex, who looked even more flustered. The store had settled into a lull. The earlier awkwardness dissolved into the hum of separate tasks. Mrs. Turnbull stood in the storeroom, pouring water from an old kettle into a chipped mug. There was no staff room. This corner, crammed between shelves of inventory, had become her refuge. A quiet place she could slink off to for a rare break. She stirred her tea absent-mindedly, her gaze lingering at the chair she had asked Alex to drag in there a few weeks ago, longing to take the weight off her aching feet. Up front, Sarah perched behind the till. Her hands worked diligently, or so it might appear at first glance. In truth, she was crafting a paper aeroplane from one of the leaflets that had been piled on the counter, ready to hand out with every purchase. With her tongue caught between her teeth, she struggled to crease the wing properly. It tilted awkwardly to one side, threatening to derail her aerodynamic ambitions. The silence was blissful, broken only by the occasional paper shuffle or the distant buzz of fluorescent lights. Alex, however, was nowhere to be seen. He'd vanished to the back of the store nearly half an hour ago, probably to be closer to the exit. It was always around 4 p.m. he started to long for home. Sarah hadn't bothered to check on him. His absence was a rare gift, and she intended to enjoy it for as long as it lasted. The bell above the door jingled, drawing Sarah's attention. She thought briefly it may have been Alex trying to escape early, but instead, a young man, probably in his mid-20s, shuffled inside. His trainers were scuffed, his hoodie loose and well-worn. He approached the counter cautiously, his gaze darting around the shop before landing on her. Hi. Do you sell Adderall? He asked, his voice low. Sarah raised an eyebrow, leaning on the counter with mock seriousness. Oh, sure, she replied dryly. Right next to the unicorn dust and the fountain of youth pills. Want me to throw in some magic beans while I'm at it? The man blinked, caught off guard. His lips twitched as though he couldn't decide whether to laugh or take her seriously. Adderall is an American prescription drug, hun. Last I checked, we are in the UK, Sarah quipped, her tone dripping with condescension as she placed her hands firmly on the counter. She tilted her head, feigning a sweet smile. Regardless of that little fact, even if we did stock that here, as fun as it would be to break multiple laws just for you, I think I would pass. The man let out a low chuckle, his cheeks reddening slightly. Right, thought I'd ask. Sure you did. Sarah leaned back, crossing her arms. Listen, unless you've got a golden ticket or a very generous GP, you're not walking out of here with anything stronger than ibuprofen. And even that comes with a judgmental glare. Mrs. Turnbull appeared from the store cupboard, her mug of tea in hand. Everything all right here? She asked, her sharp eyes darting between Sarah and the customer. Oh, just a pharmacy tourist looking for contraband, Sarah said breezily, waving a dismissive hand. Mrs. Turnbull raised an eyebrow at the man. We don't sell that kind of thing here, she said firmly, though there was a hint of kindness in her tone that contrasted Sarah's sharpness. If that's all you need, I suggest you move along. The young man hesitated for a moment, preparing his rebuttal. From somewhere in the back, a loud thud echoed, followed by Alex's voice. I'm fine, he called out. Sarah and Mrs. Turnbull turned sharply toward the noise as Alex emerged, hopping slightly and clutching his shin. He maneuvered out from behind a shelving unit, his face a mix of embarrassment and indignation. It's not Adderall you want, it's Elvance, he declared, attempting to maintain some level of authority while rubbing his leg. The young man raised an eyebrow, his interest piqued. Oh yeah? He asked, leaning slightly toward Alex. Sarah groaned audibly, her fingers tightening around the paper aeroplane she was still absently holding. She shot Alex a withering glare, silently begging him to stop. This guy was this close to leaving, And now Alex was playing the role of unsolicited pharmacy guide. "For the love of..." she muttered under her breath. "Yeah," Alex interjected, oblivious to her frustration. "One time I was at this busing party and a guy was like, 'I'm off to grab some amphetamines, $10 a pop.' And we were all like, 'Okay.' So we chipped in, handed him our cash, and half an hour later, he comes back with these Elven-Say pills, blue and white and stuff, all legit." The customer raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. Alex leaned against the counter, warming to his story. "So we all took them, right? About half an hour later, my mates are bouncing around like lunatics, having the time of their lives. And me? I'm just chilling in this chair thinking, 'Oh man, I got a dud.' Turns out," he paused for dramatic effect, "I've got ADHD. I paid $10 to calm down." The customer's lips twitched, caught between amusement and disbelief. Sarah's hand collided with her forehead. "Oh my God, Alex, stop." She turned to the man with a serious stare. "He's not a pharmacist." Mrs. Turnbull placed her mug on the counter and raised an eyebrow. "Alex, what on earth are you going on about now?" "Just educating the public," Alex replied with a grin. "Educate yourself first," Sarah shot back, her voice sharp, preferably quietly. Mrs. Turnbull sighed. "Alex, we've talked about this. No personal anecdotes on the job. Now, go do something productive before I assign you toilet duty." "We don't have toil," Alex began, but the words died on his lips when Mrs. Turnbull shot him a stern glare. He held up his hands in surrender, still smirking. "Fine, fine. I'm going." As Alex disappeared into the aisles, Sarah turned back to the customer with a forced smile. "So, can I help you with anything else?" The man's smug expression returned. "You know, I can just come back and take them once the unleashing begins, right?" Sarah froze, her smile dropping. The casual way he said it chilled her more than if he'd shouted. She swallowed the knot forming in her throat, scrambling to find a response that wouldn't make the situation worse. Mrs. Turnbull sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. It was her turn to diffuse the situation, and her tone was calm but firm. "We're not here to discuss hypotheticals, young man. If you've got a genuine need for something, come back with a prescription. Otherwise, you're wasting our time." Her words were sharp enough to sting, but the underlying warning in her gaze was impossible to miss. She held his eyes for a beat longer, the weight of authority settling in the room. The man's smirk faltered, his confidence visibly wavering under her steady stare. "Whatever," he muttered, shoving his hands into his pockets. Mrs. Turnbull didn't look away until he turned and shuffled toward the door. As the bell jingled behind him, she exhaled slowly, turning to Sarah, who still gripped her paper plane like a talisman. "Keep an eye out," Mrs. Turnbull said quietly, her voice steady but tinged with unease. "We're too close to the unleashing to take any chances." She picked up her cup of tea from the desk and turned, heading back to the cupboard. "Oh, and Sarah," she remembered, "stop turning the flyers into art projects." "Technically, it's engineering," Sarah said under her breath, earning a stern glare as Mrs. Turnbull disappeared round the corner. The late afternoon sun reflected off the glossy leaflet Mrs. Turnbull held loosely in her hand. Every morning for the last week, the shop floor beneath the letterbox had been carpeted in a brightly coloured sea of glossy propaganda. New material regarding the ever-looming unleashing. She would stack them neatly, to be read while waiting for the younger members of staff to finish the closing routine later that day. She was too old to be mopping floors, but more importantly, she was too old for the unleashing. The heading read, "Protect our elderly, secure them a place, now to see out the unleashing in comfort and safety." Mrs. Turnbull's fingers tightened around the edges of the paper as she read the words, crumpling the corners. She tossed the leaflet onto the counter, her chest tightening with unease. "Comfort and safety," she muttered bitterly, remembering the small print on the back that outlined the special procedures for those willing to leave their homes and check into the sanctuary. Once she went in, there would be no coming out. How many times had she heard the word sanctuary used to describe what was really nothing more than a cage? A safe, controlled environment for the elderly, where no one would cause trouble and no one would ask questions. A place where she would quietly fade away. The thought of going there was nauseating. But what if the unleashing became too much? People could do anything, and no one would stop them. No one would care. The thought of being out there vulnerable with no laws to protect her was worse than the sanctuary. She'd be at the mercy of whoever walked through the door. The fear had crept up on her quietly, like a cold wind at night, and now it was impossible to shake off. If someone broke into my house? The thought spiraled. What could she do? There was no police, no safety net. She could just see it. Some thug, or worse, breaking in to take whatever they wanted. Or worse still, whatever they needed. But then, if she checked into the sanctuary, she'd never leave. She'd never see another sunrise, never laugh again at the silly little things. And she hated the thought of being shut away, forgotten. Not when she still had her strength, such as it was, left to fight. She ran a hand over her forehead. It wasn't just the sanctuary that scared her. It was the unknown. The fear that once the unleashing started, anything was possible. But what if staying out here meant she'd be dead before she had a chance to prove herself? It felt like a horrible, twisted choice. Comfort or control, safety or survival. She straightened up, eyes falling on the stack of leaflets once more, each one filled with a different message for the unsuspecting public, each one perfectly constructed to incite excitement for the right people and fear for the rest. They knew what they were doing from the start, she thought. The Council of Fathers had to come up with a way to quiet the rallies and protests that had sprung up soon after their rise to power, so they decided to give them one night a year to just have at it for their release, without any punishment, get it out of their system, and then go back to being good little girls. The name they chose was fitting, the Unleashing. They thought the irony would be lost, but she knew they meant to unleash women from their chains for one night. A bitter laugh bubbled up, but she swallowed it down. Did the council really think they could fool her? Did they even realize that by creating 24 hours where crime was legal, it wasn't just the women who could partake? Of course they realized. They were hoping people of the male persuasion would sort the problem for them. "I'll see it through," she whispered to herself, more firmly this time. It didn't feel like much of a promise, but it was a promise to herself. A refusal to be another victim. She wasn't going to let them take her without a fight. She had to make it through this storm, whatever it turned out to be. Her hand hovered over the bin for a moment before she dropped it in. It floated down like an empty promise to settle with the rest. Whatever happened, she wouldn't run. She would stay. She would face the unleashing. Even if it broke her, she'd face it on her feet, not cowering in some prison. Not today. Sarah propped the dustpan and brush back against the wall in the store cupboard and clicked off the light. "One more day," she sighed as she locked the door. Mrs. Turnbull didn't acknowledge her straight away, her thoughts still at the bottom of the bin with her leaflet. "Yes," she replied mournfully. They walked side by side down the aisle, the shop's fluorescent lights humming softly above them. Sarah pulled her beanie over her ears, her fingers lingering on the edge of the fabric. "Do you think it will be bad?" she asked, her eyebrows raised, voice quieter than she intended. "Yes." Mrs. Turnbull didn't sugarcoat it, her answer blunt and immediate. There was no need for pretense. They both knew the truth, even if they hadn't said it aloud until now. Sarah looked ahead, her gaze fixed on the rows of neatly stocked shelves, each one a temporary display of order in a world about to lose its grip on it entirely. She had listened to the chatter regarding the unleashing day after day for weeks. It never felt real, just a thing that could happen, not would happen. Her stomach churned, though she wasn't sure if it was the thought of tomorrow or the remnants of the petrol station's sandwich she'd wolfed down earlier. She thought about her flat, about the flimsy locks on the door, the shaky window latches she'd meant to fix weeks ago. It was too late to do anything now. Sarah's pace slowed as they approached the exit. It's not just us, though, is it? Do you think they'll actually go through with it? The men, I mean. Do you think they'll... She trailed off, the words too heavy to finish. Mrs. Turnbull glanced at her and matched her slower pace. Her lined face creased with a weariness that felt older than her years. They've been waiting for permission, love. That's all this is. Permission. Sarah swallowed hard, her hand brushing the new cans of Drexham family soup on the shelf as they walked past. The older woman's words settled like lead in her chest. She didn't want to believe it, that the people around her, people she passed on the street every day, could so easily throw away their humanity. But deep down, she knew Mrs. Turnbull was right. "What about you?" Mrs. Turnbull asked suddenly, her voice softer now. "You've got a plan, haven't you?" Sarah hesitated, her fingers curling into the edges of her sleeves. "I've got locks," she said, but it sounded feeble even to her own ears. The truth was, she hadn't really thought about it. That day had always seemed so far away. But now it was right here, painfully close. "And a bat?" Under the bed. She forced a weak smile, but it faded quickly. "It's stupid, isn't it? A bat. There's not going to be." "It's not stupid." Mrs. Turnbull's voice was firm and steady, cutting through Sarah's growing doubt. "You do what you have to. You don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Mrs. Turnbull raised an eyebrow, her voice softening at the sight of Sarah's worried expression. A shadow of a grin tugged at her mouth. "You've got more fight in you than you know, Sarah. You'll see." Just as they approached the exit, Sarah stopped, hand firmly on the door handle, glancing sideways at Mrs. Turnbull. "So, who's in tomorrow?" she asked, trying to sound casual, though the weight of the question hung between them. Mrs. Turnbull hesitated, her hand tightening around the strap of her bag. "It's me and you, dear," she replied quietly. "Last shift before the storm." Sarah frowned, her chest tightening. "Are you still planning to close at 5? Mrs. Turnbull nodded. "Yes, it's ordered, unfortunately, so it gives us an hour to get home before it all kicks off at 6. Sarah glanced at her watch. 5:20 p.m. Less than an hour. Mrs. Turnbull didn't account for the closing process, she thought. Sarah's stomach twisted. Half an hour wasn't enough time, especially for Mrs. Turnbull. The older woman's walk home would take at least 30 minutes on a good day. What if the streets were already turning chaotic? What if someone decided to start early? "That's cutting it a bit fine," Sarah said, pulling her beanie down further over her ears as though the extra warmth might shield her from the unease creeping in. "You'll be all right getting back, though, yeah? 30 minutes? Mrs. Turnbull gave her a reassuring smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I've been walking these streets longer than you've been alive, Sarah. I'll manage." Sarah's frown deepened. "Still, maybe I can walk with you. I mean, my house is in the opposite direction, but it's not that far." Mrs. Turnbull cut her off gently. "No, child. You'll need to get home as fast as you can. Don't worry about me." "But..." "No buts," Mrs. Turnbull said firmly, her gaze softening. "You've got locks, and that bat you mentioned?" Sarah nodded reluctantly, though the idea of leaving Mrs. Turnbull to walk home alone sat uneasily in her chest. "Then you'll be all right. And so will I," Mrs. Turnbull added with a small, encouraging nod. Sarah bit her lip, glancing at the door. She wanted to believe her. She needed to believe her. But the image of the older woman trudging home alone as the streets began to shift and darken with the oncoming chaos refused to leave her mind. "Okay," Sarah murmured, though her voice was laced with doubt. She hesitated, her hand on the lock. "Just promise me you'll be careful, yeah?" Mrs. Turnbull chuckled lightly, the sound of faint comfort in the growing tension. "Careful's my middle name. You focus on getting yourself home in one piece. That's an order." With a reluctant nod, Sarah unlocked the door. "I'm free tomorrow." The sudden shout came from deep within the store, startling them both. Mrs. Turnbull jumped, her keys flying out of her hand and clattering to the floor. "What the—" Mrs. Turnbull muttered, clutching her chest. Sarah spun around, her brows furrowing as she peered into the dimly lit aisles. A familiar figure emerged, grinning sheepishly. Alex, with his hoodie slightly askew and his earbuds dangling around his neck. "Did I scare you?" "Sorry," Alex said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "Didn't realize you two were still here." "Alex," Mrs. Turnbull snapped, her tone sharp enough to cut through the remaining tension. She bent to retrieve her keys, shaking her head. "You're going to give me a bloody heart attack one of these days." Sarah let out a shaky laugh, the adrenaline from the scare ebbing away. "What are you even doing back here? Your shift ended at 1. "Left my phone," Alex said, patting his pocket. "Came back to grab it from the cloakroom, but there was a notification for the new game I've been after just staring me in the face when I found it. Thought I'd take advantage of the Wi-Fi and download it while I was here. It took ages and... well, I fell asleep." He rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. "Anyway, I thought I'd save the day by volunteering my services tomorrow. You know, so you two can get out of here quicker." Sarah rolled her eyes. "You're not rotated in tomorrow, Alex." He shrugged, unfazed. "That's why I said volunteering, Sarah," he countered in an exaggerated voice, smirking. "Just saying, I'm a hero if you need one." "Thank you for the offer, but there is no way your parents will let you be out so late with the unleashing looming, Alex," Mrs. Turnbull said, regret etched into her voice. "That's why you're not down to be in." "It'll be fine, Mrs. T, honest. I live like 2 seconds away," he pleaded, his voice rising in protest. "I want to help," he added, his grin widening slightly. "And I like money." Mrs. Turnbull sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Oh my. Well, I'll not put you down formally, but if your parents say it's okay, and only if they say it's okay, you may come in from 3 to 5 and help with the last of the stock take before closing. As soon as the last customer exits, so shall we. After we batten down the hatches, of course." "Deal," Alex said, his grin now ear to ear as if he'd just won a negotiation. "I'll ask them tonight. They won't mind, promise." Mrs. Turnbull gave him a pointed look. "I mean it, Alex. If they don't agree, I don't want to see you here. No sneaking in because you forgot your phone again." "Scout's honor!" he exclaimed, mocking a military salute instead of the affiliated hand signal. As she watched Alex practically bounce out of the door, Sarah turned back to Mrs. Turnbull with a wry smile. "Well, at least someone's not worried." "Give it time," Mrs. Turnbull replied, her voice tinged with dry humour. "Even he'll feel it soon enough." The mood sobered quickly, and they exchanged a quiet nod before finally stepping out into the night.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening. That was the 5th chapter of my new novel, What Remains of Us. If you're just tuning in now, none of that probably made any sense, but well done for sticking it out. If you do want to go back and catch up, I'll link the first 4 chapters in the description. Just a quick note to say, the audio for this novel was generated chapter by chapter before the book was published, before the book was finished, actually. It was originally only produced for audiobook so that my sister could listen to the chapters as the story developed. I stopped converting the book to audio for her at around chapter 12 as life got a bit hectic. There are very slight variations between the novel and this narration up to chapter 12. Not much, but the one that I think needs to be mentioned is the unleashing in the novel has been reduced from 24 to 12 hours. I got to about 80,000 words and thought, this is going to go on a bit. So I dropped it down for your sake and mine. As the chapters progress, you will notice the shift, so please keep in mind that it's 12 lawless hours and not the original 24. I plan to correct this in the future, but because I'm using text-to-speech to narrate the series, I'm working with limited credits. If you'd like to help me get more credits, so I can correct this faster, and also generate my stories faster, I do have a Patreon linked in the description. There's a lot of cool benefits as the levels progress, like early access to videos and exclusive content, getting your name in the credits, and even becoming a character in my Broadcasts from Dreadmore series. If you can't become a member, that's no problem. Simply liking, sharing, commenting, or subscribing really helps a lot. Thanks again for taking the time out of your day to listen.